Welcome to Winning the Audition, a special series from Contrabass Conversations featuring advice from leaders in the field about preparing and executing auditions successfully. This series is drawn from interviews conducted with dozens of bassists from orchestras like the Philadelphia Orchestra, Boston Symphony, Cleveland Orchestra, National Symphony, Chicago Symphony, and Houston Symphony, plus some of the major pedagogues in the field. This series provides actionable advice that you can use to take your auditioning to the next level. And while we're speaking with bassists for these episodes, this advice can certainly be applied to other instruments and disciplines as well. This episode digs into successful routines that people have used to win auditions, and it's fascinating to look at both the diversity and the commonalities. I think you're really going to get a lot out of this episode. So excited to put this out. This is a meaty episode for sure. And I'm thrilled to have Discover Double Bass on board as our series sponsor. And I'd like to let you know a little bit about their double bass scales play-along collection. I've been using these tracks for the last couple of months in my own practice, and they're super helpful. It's an incredibly comprehensive resource. They've got 17 different types of scales in all 12 keys, and you get MP3s for these in slow versions, fast versions. That's great for practicing, plus PDFs with fingerings, tips for practicing scales, and even key facts for each scale. And this is a great resource. I'm finding it tremendously helpful. It'd be great for teachers, students, anybody. Super cool. It's $49. It's worth every penny. Check this out and much more at discoverdoublebass.com. So today we start with Cleveland Orchestra principal bassist Max Dimoff, who gives us some general advice about preparing for auditions that I think is helpful. It's a good mindset. And he talks about his routine, which is all about dividing his practicing into 90-minute chunks.
In my preparation, I would wake up every morning at 7 o'clock and do my technical routine, get it out of the way first thing in the morning. I'd be done by 8:30. And then actually, when I was preparing for the Cleveland audition, I had a job with the Seattle Symphony, and I had a baby. And so I had to find a way to work that into my life. And so any student that tells me that they can't find time to practice, I just don't buy it, because I know you have classes, I know you have final exams and everything else, but that's just not that's not as busy as having a child and having a job too. So because I've been in both of those places. So I would go to my morning rehearsal that morning. You know, if you're a student, you go to your classes in the morning, and then I would practice from 2 to 3:30 in the afternoon, unless I had a rehearsal in the afternoon, and I would really break down my excerpts instead of just running through things, just sort of pounding them out. I hate the idea of pounding out excerpts. I would really take them apart and work on them little bits at a time, and maybe spend 10, 15 minutes on the more difficult ones, maybe 5 minutes even on a small snippet of something. Say like I remember the Marriage of Figaro. It was on my audition for Cleveland. And so I'm not going to spend 45 minutes working on that. Just take it apart into bowing rhythm patterns, and not even bothering to play it through necessarily. And then in the evening, I would practice from 7 to 8:30 doing the same thing, and focusing actually a little more on my solo at that time, just to sort of mix it up a little bit and keep my mind as fresh as I could. And so I've had 3 sessions of an hour and a half, unless I had a concert, then I couldn't do that. And 4.5 hours a day of really focused practice that's really enough time. And I find too that breaking it up that way, that I was always fresh physically and mentally for the next session. I couldn't wait to get to the next session, because I wouldn't ever wear myself down. So to this day, I never practice more than an hour and a half at a time.
Michael Hovnanian of the Chicago Symphony advises taping, playing for other people, and keeping up your musical imagination by practicing other music.
The thing that I didn't do enough of was play for other people, which I think is great, because I seem to be moving around a lot, or I wasn't studying with anybody. But I think that is a huge thing, is to make sure that you play for other people. That, and taping, I think are really important. I think, once you could sort of get your fingers around the excerpts and stuff, which a lot of players can do nowadays. I think rather than sort of beat your head over the excerpts too much, I'd say practice something else, or try and figure out what is it that I'm not doing well. What about my playing just generally needs to get better, not the fact that I can't play Mozart 35 as fast as I want to. So, I'm just going to play that over and over and over and over and over until I can get it faster. So, well, why can't I play it fast? Is it the shifting? Is it the bow? What is it? So try and break it down, then work on something, either scales or etudes or string crossing exercises, sort of try and boil it down to the essentials, I guess, I would say. And I think that tends to make the practicing more efficient too, I think, so that when you come to the excerpt, you have a little more spontaneity, and then you bring sort of a fresher approach to it rather than just, it's like, oh my God, I played this so, because you're going to have to play it a million times anyway. So almost try and stay away from it just a little bit would be my advice.
Many successful auditioners talk about what Michael just described, the importance of kind of staying away from the excerpts and finding other ways to practice those techniques through scales or etudes or exercises that hit on what you really need to work on for the audition. It's something that you'll hear more about as this series progresses. Now, Michael's colleague, Alex Hanna, principal bass at the Chicago Symphony, covers in great detail his experience preparing for his Chicago Symphony audition.
So I got the announcement in August of that year, and that was a pretty big moment for me, opening up the union paper, and it was like, well, there it is.
Last time that job was posted was who was president?
Yeah, seriously. Well,
Eisenhower, maybe.
That job had probably never even been posted.
Yeah,
that's
that's true.
That was back in the days when it was kind of a recommendation of a conductor. So I was thrilled. I remember just holding that paper. I saw it, I read it a few times, and then I kind of closed it and looked up, and I just started pacing around the house. It's like, okay, I've been waiting for this my whole life. What am I going to do? It was a very thrilling moment for me. And so, I remember my bass was in the shop at that moment, and so I couldn't practice. And so I finally got my bass back, and it was all cleaned up. I got the fingerboard all set up, and I was like a madman. I really started practicing. It was practicing at a whole nother level than I had ever done before. So we were off for the summer at that point. Most orchestras don't play in August or early September. So I wasn't going on vacation or anything. So I would drive downtown to the hall, and nobody was there because we were on vacation. And I was practicing 5 or 6 hours a day. I would get up really early and get down there probably around 9:30, and I'd practice until 4 or 5. I was drinking lots of coffee.
Mm-hmm.
And it was fun.
Mm-hmm.
It was just so fun to be down there at the hall. Nobody was there, and I still had a lot of time before the prelims too. The prelims were in, I think, late November, so that's a lot of time. And I also didn't have the list yet.
Mm-hmm.
But I knew, I just want to start getting better. And so I would practice box suites and standard excerpts, concerti, all this stuff. And I was just really pushing. And I was also really honest about what my weaknesses were. I wasn't playing, I'm really good at Brahms' 2-letter E. That's kind of one of my excerpts that's just always in the pocket. I wasn't practicing that. I was practicing Mendelssohn 4, which is extremely challenging to me, and I was really pushing, and sometimes I would spend a whole day on one excerpt, really picking it apart. As you get closer to the audition, you want to be going through the rep pretty consistently, all of it on a consistent basis. But starting so early, I had a great opportunity to really bring my playing to a higher level. So I did that practicing schedule for several months. And then we went back to work, and I was playing with the DSO, that was the year we were on strike. So that vacation kind of just
extended.
Yeah. And so I just had all this time to practice, and I used every bit of it. My wife had a full-time job at the time, and so it was just me and the dog. And sometimes I would even take the dog over to a friend's house just not to be distracted.
Mm-hmm.
So I took it really seriously. Then approaching the audition, I played for a lot of people in the Detroit Symphony, a lot of former teachers, and I performed the list for a lot of people.
Like Alex shared, starting early is such a critical factor in audition success, and so many successful auditioners have this same experience. And the excitement in Alex's voice describing preparing for the audition, it just sounds like so much fun. And what a healthy way to approach an audition. Alex talks about how he divides the list up for practicing purposes and also the importance of taking time off during this preparation process.
I always split the list into 4 groups. On one day, I'll do half the list in the morning, then the other half in the afternoon or evening. And then of that B list, so I've got like A and B. Then on the second day, I do the B list, half in the morning, half in the afternoon.
Stylistic logic, or you just break them down alphabetically, or do you?
Yeah, stylistically, I like to split them up. So if there's, let's say that Mozart 39, Mozart 40, and, Heldenleben and Don Juan are all on the list. I'll do one Mozart and one Strauss on one day, and then one Mozart and one, Strauss on the other day. And I also found it to be really helpful to take one complete day off every 7 days. So one day off a week where I don't play the bass at all. And then I like to never go more than 3 days straight without doing a half day. So a half day being, I'll just practice a couple hours in the morning and then I'll be done. I'll do something fun the rest of the day. And that half day turned out to be kind of a really nice crutch or kind of relief, because sometimes, I would even do one day after a day off and think to myself, I am really burnt out. There's no inspiration coming out of me right now. Just going to do a half day. So that way you can still get something done and not feel really guilty or beat yourself up about it. And then you go back after that half day thinking, okay, I'm fresh now. I can put 3 big days on here. Usually by the 3rd day, I was getting pretty crazy, and kind of frustrated with what I was doing. But that was a great schedule.
It's interesting to look at the commonalities between Max, Michael, and Alex, and finding ways to avoid burnout and keep the level of practice at a point where it's an enjoyable process seem to come up time and time again. Let's take 2 players that have recently won auditions: Houston Symphony principal bassist Robin Kesselman and Lyric Opera of Chicago bassist Ian Hallis. And let's take a large-scale look at how they prepare for auditions. We'll start with Ian talking about how he views the entire process zoomed out.
I'm most comfortable starting a list about, I'd say, 4 to 6 weeks outside of the audition. Otherwise, if it's any more time, my head just kind of explodes. There's just too many things to think about for too long. So I get it inside my head.
And here's Robin, very similar, but a few differences.
I like to have 7 or 8 weeks. And the way I structure it in my mind is more kind of by percentage of time that has elapsed as opposed to maybe a week thing. But I want to take the first 50% of the interval and really hibernate and start things, even if I've worked on, like, if I need to work out Beethoven 5, third movement, if I had to start working on it tomorrow, day one would be considerably under 50% tempo, like considerably under half tempo. And then working it up over, if I have 4 weeks, then really being militant about proportionally working it up.
And a lot of people talked about this slow practice, this long-term slow practice. Andy Ricidi was talking about half tempo, quarter tempo in episode 2 of this series. And Ian digs into that as well.
Most of the time it's spent under tempo. So given the amount of time that I've given myself, I'll take an excerpt as far back in time as I can. I've gone as far as 40% of tempo. So for example, here, take the first movement, Mozart 40. I like to play that around half note 104-ish. I would be below 50 to start that excerpt for this particular example. So it's pretty unrecognizable. And you're just at that point, you're getting used to the mechanics of everything. Is it in tune? But more importantly, do you know what you're going to accomplish by the end? You want to always have a clear map to where you're going with the excerpts.
Both of these guys have this slow, methodical plan in mind. They've sketched it all out. Here's Robin on the same topic.
It's not like I work it up really slow and then I kind of bang through it a little while and then I kind of come back to it being slow. I mean, if I have to move something 40 clicks divided over every other day for 4 weeks, then I don't want to do that math on the air. But whatever it is, I don't know. I think that there's a different type of consistency. And there's just a different product that comes from that kind of approach. Really be not letting myself just then kind of have some fun time at the end of a practice session, just barrel through things, really try not to instill all the things that brings with it.
So Alex Hanna talked about dividing the list, and that's something you hear time and time again from these successful auditioners, and Robin talks a bit about that too. He goes into quite a bit of detail.
If I have a list, I sort of divide it down the middle, but kind of do it fantasy draft style. So if I have 2 Beethoven symphonies, then I put one on each day, or depending on what they are, and that kind of thing. There's 2 Mozart symphonies if they're complete symphonies. Try and make the lists kind of parallel each other, so it's not like all have complementary challenges where they're kind of both yin instead of one being a yin and a yang. Like,
sure,
not one isn't all strokey, one isn't all lyrical. That's overly simplifying. But kind of try to think seriously about the way I divide it up. Same with orchestra solos. Like do half them on one, half the other way, and then just do it every other day.
And in addition to practicing the list slowly and building it up over time, Ian talks about tuning the list, practicing the entire list at 60. Basically throughout the entire process.
Starting the first day of my prep, I'm going to put the metronome on 60 and play each note of that list at 60. So just 1 note per second of the entire list. I might make amendments to that if there's a bunch of complete works.
Sure.
But for the lyric list since October, almost every single day I've been playing each note of that entire list at, let's say each note is a quarter note 60. For almost 3 months. And that just helps you solidify the pitch, because if you can play something in tune slowly, it's going to be better in tune fast. The opposite is not true at all. The tuning is still happening every single day, even the morning of the lyric finals. I tune the whole list start to finish. Yeah, so that's what my preparation looks like.
Both Ian and Robin talk about how they take the show on the road, how they start to play for people, how they record, and how that takes place kind of in the second half of the prep process. Here's Robin talking through the process for him.
I would say the first 50% of the time, so if it's 8 weeks, if the first 4 weeks, I really don't play for people. I mean, I really don't, nothing's put together, it's all really very cut up. So if that's 4 weeks, then we got 4 to go. Then the next 2, or the next one is really kind of buffering the edges, making sure they're being put back together to being real pieces of music, and kind of smooth out the wax and give it a shine. So it's back to being complete pieces, and you're playing with recordings, getting the flow right, and all this while, both in the first half too, like recording not just daily but kind of constantly. Like, to record a lot. I mean, it's so easy. It's like we can just record on our phones. So there's like I'm not too concerned with sound quality until maybe later. But at first, I mean, it's just kind of feedback, and it's amazing what we can't perceive while we're playing. It's incredible. And then I would say when I'm kind of putting it together, and then maybe spend a week feeling more comfortable about that, and then I just like take the show on the road, play for everybody and anybody that'll listen, start setting up mocks or lessons with other instruments. And I felt like once I got to Philadelphia, I really kind of stopped playing for bass players that weren't my teachers or colleagues, doing mock auditions. But I remember having a great lesson with the timpanist of Philly Orchestra, bassoon player, just people who I just looked up to and were inspired by, and just got so much more out of that aspect of it. Because the truth of the matter is, bass players don't hire us. Bass players. I don't really know. I mean, I can't speak for every orchestra's committee compliment, but it's going to be under 50%. And so, I mean, I remember the timpanist. He said something amazing. I remember I was playing some part of Mahler 5, and he said, "Robin, that sounds great. I can tell you're playing this passage really well, but I have no idea what the pitches are." And that was really eye-opening, because it was like, yeah, if your ear's not totally living in this universe, the sound world that we live in, then yeah, you might as well just muffle the strings with your left forearm and bang away. It would sound the same to a lot of these people. So just having a newfound commitment to making sure there's pitch and tone throughout all aspects of all types of past work,
Ian talks about playing for people as well.
I'll also play for as many people as possible. I've always been fortunate to have very supportive studio members who are happy to go out of their way to listen to you. And I have great teachers who, have given me more time than I might deserve. Even I'll go downtown in LA and play for some of the Philharmonic members, just anybody who I can get a hand on. It's important to also play for non-bass players because they hear things differently. I have a really good friend who I did my undergrad with, who just began her master's at USC in vocal performance, and I played for her, and she was just extremely helpful in getting some of the characters solid because she knew the operas far better than I did. Obviously, I knew what was going on in the opera when I was playing the excerpts, because context is everything, but her sort of total immersion in that world for as long as she'd been in it was really helpful. So I'd recommend playing for anybody you can get to come in the room with you.
Okay, we're now getting down to the last week or maybe 2 weeks of preparation. And both of these guys have a lot of similarities, but a few differences. Here's what Robin does that last bit of time.
The last week, I kind of go back to hibernating and really kind of stop playing for people. I don't taper off like hours-wise. I think hours-wise, starting through, it's all pretty much the same. It's just that they're used differently. So then the last week, kind of go back to hibernating and really start running like kind of rounds, like kind of start running like 4 or 5 excerpts in a row or 3 in a row. And I kind of just know what really I have to, and running it for myself in a recorder and maybe taking 3 excerpts, running them and listening and then doing it again and doing that for a while and then moving up maybe in like an hour and a half or something and then moving on. And just really kind of getting back to like very private, building myself up. I don't really need to have things go wrong in front of people the last like 3 days before I'm going to leave. Right. Which just isn't really like helpful for me.
Here's Ian 10 days out before the audition.
10 days before the audition is when I start to run things. And like I said, with the lyric audition, I'm going to start recording a few days before that just to catch things as they're close enough to tempo where they start to make sense. You can start to put the pieces together about what's actually happening. But I decided on 10 days of run-throughs because Dave, my master's teacher, he gave us a book about a year ago. He gave us a little kind of winter break book project. So he bought us all this book called Toughness Training for Sports, and it's by James Lohr. I think that's how to pronounce his last name. It's spelled Loehr. And it's a book on mental toughness training. So just increasing your own resilience and how you deal with stress. It's a really interesting book, but something that really struck me as important was the notion that he said a peak performance is only going to last for 1 to 2 weeks. And he's talking about athletes. I think in this context, he was talking about sprinters. So sprinters are going to work on their mechanics for a bunch of time, and when they're building up to a race, they'll really start to hit their stride about 1 to 2 weeks before. So using that in my own audition context, I started after I read the book, I started to use about 2 weeks. And things were still consistent at the end of those 2 weeks, but towards the end, they felt really good, whereas when I would show up with 2 weeks of run-throughs, it was a little fatigued. I don't want to say I got complacent with the way things were, but I didn't really feel like I was in the pocket when I would play those things with 2 weeks of run-through. So I decided 10 days, and that's what I did for both Atlanta and Lyric, and the results kept getting better. Mm-hmm. So 10 days out, I do two things. The first is that every morning, I'm a morning guy, so I'll get as much work as I can done early in the day. I'll unpack the bass, tune, put a little bit of rosin on, and just run excerpts. So if it's an orchestral audition, I'll run standard excerpts that I assume are most likely to be asked on a prelim round. So, for example, it might be first and last movement in Mozart 35. It's going to be Heldenleben 9, some Brahms 2 things, just like the things you've practiced forever, Beethoven 5, Scherzo Trio. And it's so hard on the first day because it feels awful. You might not have even stretched. You might not have even gone anywhere. If you're practicing in your house, you might have just gotten out of bed and done it. But the goal is to improve your worst playing. Mm-hmm. Because if you can do that, when you walk on stage and have to do it the first time, you're going to know that you've done this work if you can pick up the bass without having warmed up at all and play your excerpts down at a high level. So that's the first thing I'll do. And I do record that to just get all of the bugs, the hiccups, burps, and farts all out of there.
The concept of improving your worst playing is also referred to sometimes as adversity training. It's a concept that Don Green talks about a lot in his books. We link to those in the first part of this series, and we'll link to the book that Ian is describing for this episode as well. And by the way, it sounds like we're going to have Don Green as a podcast guest, so I'm really looking forward to that. Lyric Opera of Chicago bassist Greg Sarche explores adversity training too. Here's a clip of both Peter Tambroni talking about what Greg does and Greg himself.
Take everything to the next level. Okay, you practiced your shift, but can you nail it every time without even thinking about it?
Yeah.
You know?
Right.
Like one thing, what Greg was telling me when he was preparing for the Lyric Opera, his audition year back in the 80s or whatever. And Greg's he's such a great player and great musician. But he told me he would practice, and this is almost like a Jedi. He would use earplugs sometime. He would use a blindfold sometime and practice for the audition like that. Because now you're taking variables out of the equation, you know? And I love that, you know? People say, well, how can I overcome this? I'm like, don't overcome it. Take it out of the equation, man, you know? Well, I'm nervous. Well, why are you nervous? You know, odds are nerves often come from you just didn't practice it that 10% more. Right. Where it's so comfy. Right. A lot of times. So there's a lot of other things for nerves. But, you know, man, if you could play your piece with earplugs in, and then you get to the audition and you're like, oh, man, I'm good. You've just taken it to that next level. So instead of the audition being kind of like, okay, I've never been up to 60 miles per hour, but here I am. I've got the nerves. I got this. Now he's like, man, I've driven 70. Man, the audition's only 60 miles an hour. This is a piece of cake. Yeah.
That was Pete, and here's Greg, and this was recorded, my only podcast ever recorded in a Bosnian pizza joint.
You know, I know there's some of the exercises that I've talked to you about in the past, some sensory deprivation exercises and stuff like that, which I think are pretty interesting, and I've actually never heard, so I wonder if you want to talk about that a little bit with the blindfolds.
Well, yeah, certainly using the blindfold, and that was inspired from Bobby Shu, jazz trumpet player in L.A. Earplugs, you know, just the cheap foam earplugs cut out the high range and actually amplify mid and low frequency, and playing with one ear and then the other, earplugs plus a blindfold, and this was actually had its roots while preparing for that Lyric audition in 1985 when I knew there was going to be a screen. So I would practice with a towel over my head to feel deprived and cut off and oppressed. And then also having people throw things at you while you play, like little pieces of paper, wad up paper.
And this can sound goofy or excessive if you haven't experienced any sort of adversity training before, but it's something that people find quite valuable. It's something that Don Green's worked with people on for years, and I'd recommend checking out Performance Success, Audition Success, Fight the Fear and Win, any of his books for reading more about this. All right, back to Ian with a few thoughts on the mental preparation that goes into an audition.
When the physical run-throughs start, I'll begin doing mental run-throughs where either I'll have the music with me or I'll just close my eyes and listen to a recording of the excerpt and go through it in my head as it's happening so I can feel both in my right and my left hand that I'm playing with the orchestra. And the interesting thing is that if there's any holes in your mental run-throughs, you'll kind of realize that maybe it wasn't so solid in your physical run-throughs, that maybe that's a spot that's a candidate for not necessarily memory slip, but just a loss of focus. Mm-hmm. So highlighting those, seeing where they come out, and consequently fixing those. And it's important because as you play for people, no matter how nervous you are the first time, it's more than like it's going to be less nervous the second time and the third time too. Leading up to an audition, you're playing for people and you're just not even nervous anymore. The more people that are in the room, it just doesn't really matter. You're just getting consistent. But it's important to prepare yourself for the audition when something strange might happen. Say somebody's trying to get under your skin. Fortunately, that's never happened to me, but there might be somebody in the room who's looking to get under your skin, or you might not have as much warm-up time as you thought you would, or you might have too much warm-up time and you're just not sure what's going on and you're going crazy. You're starting to overthink things. So you really need to be able to fall back on your mental focus when you're going in the audition, because the first time is the one that counts. You're more than likely you're not going to get a do-over. So you want to be able to focus on what you're trying to accomplish.
There's a real debate about whether it's better to come out to the audition one day before or 2 days before to acclimate yourself. There are pros and cons to both approaches. Brandon McLean of the Pittsburgh Symphony talks about just coming out one day before.
I usually fly in the day before. I've done the routine where I fly in a couple of days before, but I always managed to psych myself out when I did that. It's easier for me not to think too much about the audition. So if I fly out the night before, that's usually when I feel best, and then head into the audition the next day.
So this is true for many people, what Brandon's describing, but others, including Ian, find that it's helpful to get out a couple days early and get settled in. Here are Ian's thoughts.
I started, and I got this from Kevin Brown, who's the principal of the Detroit Symphony. He liked to fly out 2 days before his audition, and he would take his flying day, his travel day, completely off. So 2 days before the audition, he's not playing at all, and then have the following day, which is the day before the audition, to run things, kind of get comfortable with where he was at, retune things again, and just get comfortable with where you are so that you're not flying in the day before and your flight gets delayed and you don't get in until midnight and you have to play at 9 a.m. or something crazy like that, which definitely happens. Mm-hmm. So I thought that was really helpful. And actually, when I was looking at the auditions I've taken, the 4 auditions that I got out of prelims for, I'd had a buffer day, even before I realized that I needed to do that, which I thought was really interesting. So the 4 auditions where I didn't arrive 2 days in advance, I did in advance.
And Robin has an interesting mindset about preparing all the way until he's on stage, and there's never a moment when he couldn't make things better.
The biggest thing about the last week was I never decided that there was a day when I could not make things better. Like, I think that seems like in the tapering, I hear people talk about just kind of needing to chill out and stuff. But that works. And that, people really are into that. But I just felt like even the day before I leave, if I can shore up a pulse somewhere or kind of get a longer line somewhere, I'm recording until maybe the night before, or even in the hotel room. I just need to kind of keep having the end date be on stage in the round and not the end date be 4 days preceding or something like that.
this gives you a window into some preparation routines that people have found successful. And we're going to close out today's episode with a series of excerpts. Some of them you've actually heard before, but several of them you haven't. You'll be hearing from Alex, you'll be hearing from Max, Ian, and then also Leon Bosch and Galen McCormick. And I think one of the valuable things about synthesizing all this together like this is the chance to just get to hear people's perspectives back to back. And I'd love to have you listen for the grit and the tenacity and the mindset in these people's words. You can just feel that dedication and that drive in the way that they're describing their preparation process. And the final episode in this series is all about that special something, that incredibly hard to quantify, something that differentiates the good from the great, that magical quality. We're going to try to, as best we can, quantify and define and give some tips and techniques for developing that extra something special. So that'll be the last episode of this series. Enjoy these clips from some of these wonderful talents that we've had on the podcast.
Every morning, by about 7:15, I walked through the front doors of the University of Cape Town, the South African College of Music, and I didn't leave till after 10 o'clock at night, 7 days a week for 4 years. And that made the difference.
I'm going to give myself a year. I think I can do these gigs for a year and barely scrape by, and I'm not going to do any day jobs anymore. And I just committed myself to practicing every morning from the minute I got up.
I would wake up every morning at 7 o'clock and do my technical routine, get it out of the way first thing in the morning. I'd be done by 8:30.
I would drive downtown to the hall, and nobody was there because we were on vacation, and I was practicing 5 or 6 hours a day.
I had this whole schedule that went basically from 9 to 2, where I would practice, stop and make tea, practice, stop and take a shower, practice.
Get up really early and get down there probably around 9:30, and I'd practice until 4 or 5.
And I would really break it down and break down my excerpts instead of just running through things, just sort of pounding them out. I hate the idea of pounding out excerpts.
And my playing got so much better, not surprisingly. I could be up by 9 easily, considering no matter where I had driven back from. But yeah, I would start, 9 o'clock was scales, then it was tea time, and then 10 o'clock was usually etudes. Take another little break, then I would usually start and I would have the rep laid out for whatever audition I was taking, and from that point on, that's what I would work on.
Also really honest about what my weaknesses were. I wasn't playing, I'm really good at Brahms' 2-letter E. That's kind of one of my excerpts that's just always in the pocket. I wasn't practicing that. I was practicing Mendelssohn 4, which is extremely challenging to me. pushing, and sometimes I would spend a whole day on one excerpt, really picking it apart.
I had a particular habit. I had a way in which I worked. I worked intensely for 20 minutes, and then I'd leave the room, go away and sit down, think about it, and come back to 20 minutes more. I didn't work absolutely non-stop. I had concentrated periods, but they lasted all day.
There was at least 3 Saturdays that I spent a good 6 hours just playing one note over and over and over, bouncing my bow, trying to figure out how it works. And it was almost like meditation, you know. You have this kind of dorky idea of a bunch of monks sitting around going Om. You know, that's basically what I was doing with a bass, except instead of that I was going you know, for hours on end.
I'm going to put the metronome on 60 and play each note of that list at 60. So just one note per second of the entire list.
I mean, I remember just holding that paper. I saw it, I read it a few times, and then I kind of closed it and looked up, and I just started pacing around the house. It's like, okay, like I've been waiting for this my whole life.